Ladies and gentlemen, we're back with Season 4, Episode 2, Princess Twilight Sparkle, Part 2. This is the conclusion to the triple arc, reboot, reimagining, whatever you want to call it, new show in the beginning of Season 4, in which they learn about the Plunder Seeds, and they go to defeat the Plunder Seeds, and they do a lot of stuff, and then they win the end. Now, I kind of rushed through that because, well, I haven't given out my rating yet to these two episodes. It's really hard to say because I'm reminded of Revenge of the Sith, Star Wars Episode 3. Now, I like Star Wars Episode 3. But if I'm being 100% honest, the reason why is because the goods are great. The bads in Episode 3 are just kind of... right? I don't know how recently you guys have seen Episode 3. I admittedly haven't seen it since I did the rumination, so it's been years on my part. But it's just... and that feels like this episode. The goods in this episode are really good, and I like a lot of the ideas that come out of this. In fact, there's 3 really awesome parts of this episode. Then there's the rest of the episode, which is stupid to the point of aggravating. I mean, you're right, Act. That's basically the same thing I said, and I'm pretty sure it's the same author. Hang on, let me double check here. Yep, Canterlot Wedding was Megan McCarthy. So, yeah, same author. Well, let's go through this sequentially, as we often do. We've already seen in this show how beam battles are kind of how they fight with magic, which is boring, but understandable. And I mentioned this because, remember Chrysalis? That was kind of how that happened. I just bring that up because that's going to be like the standard method of combat for unicorns from this point until, to my knowledge, the end of the show. The beam battles. Usually opposing beams because anime. I do have to mention a couple of nice scenes about the fight between Celestia and Luna. Excuse me, between Nightmare Moon. First thing I want to mention, that's probably the most obvious point where the animation bump is noticeable. I've actually mentioned a previous animation bump, and then there's this one, and then there's another one which I can't remember where it happens. I think it's like Season 5. And to my knowledge, those are the only 3 animation bumps the show got. But each time the animation looks, like, pretty good. Like, they've done some really good stuff to really step up. That's not really the best examples of it. Actually, probably the best example of the new animation bump is actually in the last episode. When they're in the room looking at the windows, the mosaics, the historics, and you could just tell that they've upped the engine and they've upped how they're designing it and blah 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 blah. Anyways, I just wanted to mention that. Anywho, next thing I want to mention is it's so obvious why that Celestia does not want to fight what she perceives as her sister. I mean, why would she? I mentioned last time my theory that Nightmare Moon is not Luna and vice versa. And I mentioned that because, allow me to use a Warcraft parallel. I imagine at least some of my viewers have seen Warcraft. In Warcraft, there are various kinds of undead. Now, if you become a Type 3A undead, I know that sounds specific. I've got a whole thing on my website on the Lorium's page discussing it. But if you become a Type 3A undead, what happens is you are turned into an undead. You don't have to even be killed to do it. You just turn into an undead. And your soul is actually detached from yourself and put over there, right? Now, the significance of that is while you still retain the mentality and the body, the essence of who you are is gone. And thus, the person you are without your soul is effectively a completely separate person. This leads to concepts such as Death Knight Arthas, who is a different person than regular Arthas, and most of the player Death Knights during the Wrath expansion, who were Type 3A, who became Type 3B. Make sense? The catch, of course, now this is why I'm bringing this up with relative to Celestia. The catch is they're still physically that person. If you slice off the hand of someone who is a Type 3A undead, but then their soul is returned to them, you have sliced off their hand. Their hand is still gone. You have still damaged someone you care about. Right? Make sense? And so you can tell why Celestia is very clearly not wanting to fight her sister, because even though that's arguably not her sister, any damage she does to Nightmare Moon will also be done to Luna. This is also probably why she went with the banishing trick rather than trying to outright destroy, like she probably could have, especially with the elements backing her up. And yeah, the third and final thing I want to point out is Celestia actually is literally crying as she's using the elements in order to banish Luna. Very nice touch. So, that being said, what happens immediately, it's nice to see the moment. You know, I'm not going to complain about that, but this is filler. Now, whether it's good filler or bad filler, that's up to you. But one way or another, this is filler because it has nothing to do with anything. Even in the future, you know, you might think, oh, well, this gives her the idea. No. In the future, she sees, you know, the flashback of the tree and the flashback of the fight with Discord, and that comes forward, and that matters. But the actual scenes with Nightmare Moon have no relevance on anything, which brings me back to what I said last episode. I very strongly now feel that they were just like, how do we split this up into a two-parter? Because we have to split up into a two-parter, and we have to end on a dun-dun-dun. So how do we do it? And they just kind of came up with, why don't we show the Nightmare Moon thing for like 4 minutes? Because it's really short. It's super brief. Moderately well executed, but overall, which is one of the moments for this one. Anywho, I can't think of any examples, Shikor. Moving on, this leads me to then mention... Actually, that's not true. There is one thing that was actually destroyed in this series already up until this point, Lord Harrimont, and that would be Sombra, King Sombra. Now, I know they retconned that eventually, but at the time, the intention was that King Sombra was destroyed. They even went on record in interviews acknowledging that out of universe. So, filler's done. We move on. Then we get to the part where we get to the actual flashback that actually matters for the sake of the episodes. We see Celestia and Luna going after Discord. They're also pretty roughed up. I wonder why they're pretty roughed up, which is interesting to think about. Like, it's just kind of makes me wonder a little bit. Because they usually don't bother to show that. Someone had to go out of their way to make a damaged model of both of them. They look that way when they get to the Tree of Harmony later too. So obviously it was something on the path there. I like to think that what happened is they went after Discord and failed miserably, and so then they decided to go search out the Tree of Harmony. That's just my headcanon there. I have no idea. Either way, so like, we're gonna fight you, Discord, and Discord is completely unfazed by it. He just thinks it's all funny. After all, why wouldn't he be? He's already eating his plunder seeds. This is part of what I mentioned when I say that this episode is both good and bad in equal measures, because they clearly had several bits of this planned out. You know, there's some actually good foreshadowing at points in this episode. So, you know, he's just, oh, this is so funny. And then, of course, we see why he's undertaking that particular pose when we do see him eventually in the beginning of Season 2. So, then we see the Tree of Harmony for the first time. I actually mentioned that in the book we were reading earlier today. And these three symbols, we actually see them: the sun, the moon, and of course, the star. And yeah, that counts as a continuity counter. Sorry. I'll make a mention of that one here. So, you know, woo. I've lost my train of thought. Where was I? Hang on. I lost my notes. I've got a huge headache. I'm sorry. I'm trying to think through it here. Here we go. Okay. So we see the tree for the first time. We see the three symbols. We also have our first hint at the tree's purpose. Now, if memory serves, this is going to come up in like 2 seasons from now. Like towards Season 6 or the end of Season 5 or something like that. But either way, we get the idea that the tree is here to basically keep the Everfree Forest contained. Interesting to think about. Then they decide, okay, we need to go in and save the tree. No problem. You'll notice they're a lot more tolerant of Discord at this point. I'm just going to mention that as an aside, because that's going to come up much, much later. So then they fight the rock crocodile. Ha ha ha. What I like about this is twofold. First of all, it's nice that Twilight actually can't fly away when she needs to. So the flying thing has come back again, and I believe that's basically the last time that's going to happen. The second point, I like the idea of a rock crocodile. You'll notice that's the second entity from the Everfree Forest, which is portrayed as basically a nature spirit. Like the timber wolves, wolves made of timber. Now we have rock crocodiles made of rocks, which, aside from the obvious punning, just kind of lends itself more towards the whole natural druidic vibe that they've got going on for the Everfree Forest, which I like. I'm with it. So I just want to mention that in brief. So up until now, the episode's been pretty good. I've been enjoying it. Then the episode pisses me off. In, like, every way. I'm sorry. I hate this. And watching it with analysis mode on made it worse. So what happens is, after all this nonsense, and so they have a speech, whatever is in there, we will face it together. Then they fight the rock crocodile. You should go home, Twilight. That's the sequence of events, directly. There's not even a pause for commercial break. It's just, we must be together. Fight with the crocodile. You should go home. Bam, bam, bam. That's the first problem. The second problem is the fact that they want to send her home at all. So the timing and pacing of it is bad. And the fact that they decide to send her home is bad. Just the fact that that's an idea. The fact that she mentions that all of them are expendable assets, whereas we need our princess, is bad. Then there's the fact that it lasts for like 3 minutes. There's a concept on TV tropes. It's like the 10-minute retirement, and that's this, in a nutshell. I give up. I can't possibly do it. Wait, no! I'm ready to fight. I hate 10-minute retirements. I really do. Yeah, and it just races through these events, too. And everyone just kind of goes along with this. Everyone's cool. This is also a good time to mention that their plan is to go use the elements of harmony on the tree to help it, right? Like, that's what they've mentioned up until now. And you're probably thinking, well, why is that relevant? Because the elements of harmony... Relevant, not element. The elements of harmony don't work unless you have all of them. We have demonstrable proof of that. We've seen that twice, both with Discord. Once when Fluttershy refused to use hers, which meant they couldn't use it on him. And once when they tried to use it on him in his initial outing, and they didn't have all of them, and it didn't work. So, that's the reason why it's stupid to send her home in the first place, right there. Because they literally can't solve the problem with Twilight absent. Like, ignoring the feasibility of trying to keep royalty safe, and we talked last episode about the reliance on princesses and the superhero syndrome, and blah, blah, blah. They need Twilight to use the elements. So I'm like, okay, whatever. Then the episode gets good for about 5 seconds. Mostly because Discord's on screen. Look, I like John Delancey. What do you want from me? But I do have to mention there's actually some good things where he pops in. First of all, they demonstrate for the second time that he has total control over the vines. Now that may or may not be relevant, but it's interesting to note that as future episodes will show, his chaos powers don't work on everything. He doesn't just automatically have reality warping powers over everything. So the fact that he has total control over the vines is another little tidbit of foreshadowing. And again, that was in the previous episode as well. Next thing I like is Twilight is wonderfully honest with Discord. Now, yes, I do act. Although he irritates me, but for reasons we'll get to later. Because that won't happen until Season 5. He won't irritate me until Season 5. But anyways, this is pure headcanon, okay? But I like the fact that Twilight just opens up to Discord about what her problems are and why this is bugging her. And then he decides to say the things that are necessary to get her under her skin in order to prompt her to go back to her friends. Now, the reason I point that out, and I'm leading to a point eventually, but I point that out because I like to think personally that he hadn't really decided to help her until she decided to confide in him. What I mean by this is Discord is still at that phase of not understanding friendship and coordination and interaction, so he always needs someone to reach out to him first, right? Like what happened with Fluttershy. Now, this is understandable. He's never had people reach out to him before. It's such a new idea to him. So if people just kind of push against him, well, he pushes back. And he consistently has done this in every presentation up until now. Twilight confiding in him, then, shows that she actually values and cares about him, and thus he is now willing to reciprocate. That's just my take on that. I also don't think he's fully reformed yet. He won't be fully reformed, in my opinion, until the end of Season 4. You know, the one we're in right now. But I'll talk more about that in a minute. Also, I have to have a mention, a quick aside. There's this bit... Oh yeah, there's the Twilight game. There's this really brief bit where he pops into her ear to talk to her. So Discord's in her ear like, I don't know, a Q-tip. I don't know if that's deliberate or not. Never actually occurred to me before. Anywho. And then she goes right back in. So there's the 2-minute retirement I mentioned. So we're up to 4 things that irritate me about this. Now, there's a very interesting tidbit. I mentioned the foreshadowing, and I mentioned how they did obviously have some stuff planned out. Now, this is a duh in hindsight, but as the camera is panning over, at least 3 times I noticed, while the camera was panning over shots of where the ravine is, we could see a dilapidated castle in the background. Now, obviously, that's the very next episode, but I like the fact that it's there, and they actually showed that in the background if you're paying attention. So, we see that status effects are king, as usual. But then the episode continues to... So we're up to 4 things that piss me off about this whole section of the episode. The 5th one is that the 5 show up at the tree and try ineffectually and briefly to do something about the tree and fail miserably. And then immediately give up. Like, I have no idea what to do. You know who would know what to do? Twilight. If only we hadn't sent her off 2 minutes ago. This irritates me for 2 reasons, so I guess we're up to 6 reasons now. The first reason this irritates me is it has been demonstrated many times that the main 5 can do plenty without Twilight. In fact, it's demonstrated twice in this episode. Once before here, when they subdue the rockodile, excuse me, and once immediately after this, when they go to rescue Twilight. The main 5 are competent. Why are they suddenly being portrayed as this bumbling idiocy? The second reason this irritates me is because it once again showcases just how ridiculous this entire premise was to begin with. We never should have sent you away. Now, if I could... So that's 6 reasons why this pisses me off. If I can talk briefly, here's what I think happened. This is pure conjecture, based on what I know. I think they had the 2-parter. That was going to be the end of the series. Then the series didn't end, and the 2-parter was smashed down into a 1-parter. And they're like, okay. So what they did was they took the pieces that were left out, the threat to Equestria being the most obvious one and most present one, and decided to slice those into these 2-parters. The problem was those were not enough for a full episode. So they looked at that and said, we need to fill that out. Thus, they filled it out with sections that don't really fit or make sense with the rest of the episodes. And I mention this because, speaking as someone who's analyzed writing for a long time at this point, you can always tell when someone... That was nice as I took it. You can always tell when someone writes something, and then years later writes something else, and then inserts it into the middle of the thing. There's like a very definitive shift in writing and tone that happens there. And obviously this isn't a year situation, but that's exactly what it feels like. It feels like they had one story and then another story written completely separately, and they kind of smashed this one into those ones. And that's what we have here with the filler. I also have to mention, though, that this really drags these episodes down for me, which is a shame, because I really like the rest of it. Because all of this leads to 3 amazing things, in my opinion. First and foremost, they lose the elements of harmony. Now, they haven't actually used them all that often. In fact, I think they used them 3 times up to this point. But them losing the elements of harmony is a bit of a status quo changer, because they've brought up the elements of harmony many times. In fact, every time there's been any kind of a major crisis, they have mentioned getting the elements of harmony and using them. It's always been their backup weapon, right? And they're gone. They don't have access to that anymore. This also means They actually have specifically mentioned Discord. That Discord is one of the things that they're worried about losing control over because they no longer have the elements. Now, that's actually kind of awesome in its own right, because remember, as we talked about back in the episode when Discord was reformed, that the biggest problem was that everyone other than Fluttershy wanted to basically put a gun to his head and say, "Here, you're going to be reformed," and that's not how you reform someone. Now the gun has been taken away entirely. Now they have to reform him legitimately. And we'll see how that goes across Season 4. So that's cool. Status quo change, alteration to the and basically the Discord story arc has now been started. And yeah, that's awesome. Nah, I don't think so, SA2K. The second thing that this does, which is awesome, is the first true story arc of the series. Technically 2 story arcs, but after they do this thing, there's a blossom, and the tree blossoms this chest, the Chest of Harmony. And this is probably one of the better things about Season 4, in my opinion. A season-long story arc. I actually kind of wish it was more of a story arc than it is, but I'm still grateful for what we have. And they just kind of leave it there. We'll talk more about the Chest of Harmony in the future for obvious reasons, but they introduce the concept and they say, well, 6 keys, 6 locks. What do we do? I guess we'll find out in the future. From what I understand, when this episode went live, there was a lot of speculation and theory crafting about this. So that's awesome. Also, does anybody else think this is a reference to Doctor Who? Honest question. Key of Time, anybody? I mean, I'm just curious, because they have other references in this episode, so maybe. I don't know. Which leads me to the third good thing. Discord. Discord helps. He legitimately does. You notice that, right? He legitimately helps Twilight, and he legitimately helps the team. You'll notice, however, that both forms of help come from direct interaction with 2 individual people who specifically reach out to him. Twilight, I mentioned that earlier, and Fluttershy, obvious. I only point that out because, once again, his character is being portrayed consistently as someone who doesn't really get this whole friend thing yet, and he's still just kind of leaning into this. You'll also notice that he's still having fun with it. This is, in my opinion, one of the more important elements of his character arc here. That Discord is now, he's still having fun and entertaining himself, but he's doing so to help rather than to hinder. That's the only real shift in his perspective. He's still going to mess around and play around and be circuitous and trickstery, but he's going to do so in a way that's going to long-term help people rather than long-term hurt people. That's the only real shift. You'll also notice that he does still clearly value his connection to Fluttershy, because there's a brief moment where he's like, I could be free. But then Fluttershy says, yes, because we're friends. And if you want to stay friends, you're going to stop thinking whatever you're thinking. And he's like, yeah, okay. And I just point that out because it does show that for all of his faults, Discord does actually value the friendship that Fluttershy has shown to him, as shown in the previous episode. Now that's important, because it doesn't make him a good person, but it makes him someone willing to lean that direction. It's the start of reformation, like I mentioned several times earlier. So, new status quo, new story arc, new character arc. 3 good elements that come out of this episode, no pun intended. How the hell do I rate this? I think I might just average this out, because it really just... you know? I think the previous episode I will give above average, because that was pretty decent. I'm with that. It's just, it bothers me so much, Larian. God, like I'm probably getting that across in my tone and my speech, but it's just, yeah, exactly. Imperial Star, or excuse me, ISD. I think I'll just call this a wash. I'll call this an average episode. That's what I called Canterlot Wedding. That's what I'm going to call this. The good and the bad cancel each other out. Where's the yellow I'm using? There we go. So we'll call that one a wash. That's only 3 average episodes by Megan McCarthy. That's a pretty good track record there. So that's it for this week. Next week we're going to start Castlemania, which is going to formally and officially start the new story arc, and the journal, which we'll start reading from after that. And then we're going to see Daring Do for the first time, so that should be fun. And then I'm going to see a whole bunch of really awesome episodes in a row. Power Ponies, Bats, Rarity Takes Manhattan, Pinky Pride, Three's a Crowd, Twilight Time, Mod Pie. Oh, there's some really... I'm looking forward to Season 4. It's not obvious. I probably don't seem all that enthusiastic right now. That's because I'm tired and I have a massive headache. But I swear I am enthusiastic. I'm looking forward to it. So I hope you guys have enjoyed. I will see you guys... okay, right. So let me chop off the local recording.